What's going on, guys? Welcome to Titan Town for another Tennessee Titans video. Now, over the offseason, the Tennessee Titans signed Dion Lewis to pair with Derrick Henry, which should give the Tennessee Titans one of the best running back duos in the entire NFL. For today's video, we're going to go over the other running back duos and discuss which one would be the best. Could the Tennessee Titans be the best? Well, we're going to talk about it and find out. And we're going to compare everything. We're going to look at stats, achievements, styles, just really everything. Now, for this list, teams who run a running back by committee backfield will not be included. Teams such as the New England Patriots, who currently have Jeremy Hill, Sonny Michel, Mike Gillislee, Rex Burkhead, Brandon Bolden, and James White, won't be included. Neither will the Philadelphia Eagles, who have Jay Ajayi, Corey Clement, Donnell Pumphrey, Darren Sproles, and Wendell Smallwood. The Packers, who have Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, Ty Montgomery. Then the Lions, who have LeGarrette Blount, Amir Abdullah, Kerryon Johnson, Theo Riddick, Dwayne Washington, Zach Zenner. The Washington Redskins, who have Darius Geis, Robert Kelly, Chris Thompson, Samaje Perine. And neither will teams like your Pittsburgh Steelers, your Dallas Cowboys, your Arizona Cardinals, your LA Chargers, or LA Rams, who have a strictly workhorse running back. Those guys won't be included either. So let's look at Dion Lewis and Derrick Henry's stats from last season before we get into comparing those guys to other running backs. Now, I'll split these guys up into your pass-catching backs and your bruising backs, your speed and your explosion and your just power. I've kind of separated out. And some of these teams it was hard to do it for. But as for Dion Lewis, he's listed at 5'8", 195 pounds. Last season, he had 180 carries for 896 yards, which come out to a very, very good 5 yards per carry average. He had 6 touchdowns last season, and overall, he's got 10 on his career, so he really came alive last season. He caught 32 catches of 35 targets for 214 yards and another 3 touchdowns. Now, Derrick Henry is listed at 6'3", 247 pounds. I'm sure all of you already knew this. He had 176 carries last season for 744 yards, which come out to a 4.2 yards per carry, and he had 5 touchdowns to go along with that. He added 11 catches for 136 yards and another touchdown. So we got a very big guy, a very small guy. Both of them contribute in both ways. Derrick Henry is very sneaky when it comes to being well-rounded. I guess a lot of people think because of his size and the way he's built that he is not able to catch passes, but he has contributed in that phase of the game, and we did see that quite a bit last season. The first team we're going to compare these guys to are the Oakland Raiders, who have Doug Martin and Marshawn Lynch. Now, Doug Martin, I'm comparing to Dion Lewis, and Marshawn Lynch to Derrick Henry. As for Doug Martin, he stands 5'9", 223 pounds, a little bit bigger than what Dion Lewis is. Last season, he had 138 carries for 406 yards, which come out to 2.9 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. He added 9 catches for 84 yards and no TDs. So we know what Doug Martin can do, and Doug Martin is kind of a well-rounded do-it-all back. He's not specifically a pass-catching back. He's not specifically a change-of-pace back who gets out there and burns the other teams for big runs. He's more of a workhorse back. But last season, he had some off-the-field issues, which we are taking into consideration. He's had to deal with suspensions and things like that. So for that reason, you got to give Dion Lewis the edge here. Now, comparing Marshawn Lynch to Derrick Henry is a little bit tricky. Marshawn Lynch is listed at 5'11", 215 pounds, so quite a bit smaller than Henry. Last season, he had 207 carries for 891 yards, which came out to 4.3 yards per carry and 7 touchdowns. Now, last season, he didn't really start to get hot till the second half of the season. The first half was just terrible. He added 20 catches for 151 yards, so neither guy had a reception for a touchdown last season on the Oakland Raiders. Well, Doug Martin wasn't there, but neither did Marshawn Lynch. Now, it's really hard to compare these two because if you're talking about the here and now, you would go with Derrick Henry. But if you're comparing career-wise, you have to go Marshawn Lynch, as bad as I hate to admit that. Now, Marshawn Lynch has the power, so much more nimble than what Derrick Henry is. If you watch his highlight tape, he just kind of dances around while also running over people. Derrick Henry does not do that. I wish Derrick would be a little more consistent. Now, because sometimes Derrick has those big games, like the Kansas City Chiefs game in the playoffs where he had a big game, and then some games he has a slow start. I would like to see him get that head of steam faster, more consistently. And then you look at like games like the Jacksonville Jaguars where he even said after the game that he ran soft, where he just could not get going. So I wish Derrick Henry would be a little bit more consistent, but given the age and off-field issues, I'm giving the Tennessee Titans the nod here in this running back duo. Next, we have the Minnesota Vikings, and they have Dalvin Cook and Latavius Murray. Now, I know that this is not really a running back duo because Dalvin Cook is going to be the workhorse while he is healthy, but Latavius Murray has proven in the league that he can be a running back one. You can get by with Latavius Murray. He proved it last year when Dalvin Cook went down. I think it was in week 4. But Dalvin Cook is who I'm comparing to Dion Lewis, and he stands 5'11", 213 pounds. So again, he's bigger than what Dion Lewis is, but their style of football is very similar. He carried the ball 74 times for 354 yards last season, which came out to 4.8 yards per carry, just slightly behind Dion Lewis on the yards per carry average. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, and he added 11 catches for 90 yards. Latavius Murray probably is the most similar to Derrick Henry on this list when it comes to size and build. Latavius Murray is 6'3", 230 pounds. He carried the ball 216 times last season for 842 yards, which come out to 3.9 yards per carry and 8 touchdowns. He added 15 catches for 103 yards and did not have a touchdown that way. Well, when it comes to Latavius Murray and Derrick Henry, I'll start with these guys. Henry's got the edge on the size and the speed, I do believe. Yards per carry, Henry did come out slightly better than Latavius Murray, but Latavius has been more consistent in a bigger role than what Derrick Henry has had. So, but still, just slightly, I'm going to go with the upside of Derrick Henry in this one. Now, like I said, Latavius Murray is a little more consistent, but Derrick Henry just has so much more upside. Now, as for Dalvin Cook and Dion Lewis, I think I'm going to go Dalvin Cook on this one, strictly because of age. They're two very similar backs, have very similar style of play. Dalvin Cook come out hotter than what Dion Lewis did at the start of his career. Dion Lewis really last season was when he really started to come alive. So I'm going to have to give Dalvin Cook the slight edge because of how he came out hot and at what point he is in his career. So with this one, it's kind of a split, but not really because the Titans are going to use both these guys, whereas Dalvin Cook is mainly going to be the workhorse with Latavius Murray being the breather back. So Dion Lewis and Derrick Henry, I'm going to give the slight edge because they're going to spend more time on the field while being fresh. The next team we're going to compare the two running back duos to is the Cincinnati Bengals, who have Giovanni Bernard, who is being compared to Dion Lewis, and Joe Mixon, who will be compared to Derrick Henry. Now, Giovanni Bernard is 5'9" and 205 pounds is what he's listed at. Last season, he had 105 carries for 458 yards, which came out to 4.4 yards per carry and 2 TDs. He added 43 catches for 389 yards and 2 touchdowns. As for Joe Mixon, he's listed at 6'1", 228 pounds, and he had 178 carries for 626 yards, which came out to 3.5 yards per carry. He had 4 TDs on those carries. As for the receiving part of the game, he had 30 catches for 287 yards. Now, as for Giovanni Bernard and Dion Lewis, if this was a few years ago, I would have picked Giovanni Bernard over Dion Lewis because a few years ago, that year where Jeremy Hill first got drafted, and even the year before that, Giovanni Bernard was very, very productive in the league, but then injuries come up, similar to Dion Lewis. But The difference is Dion Lewis has had the opportunity to prove himself despite the injuries, where Giovanni Bernard has been more set in stone in having to share the workload, being restricted to receiving back duties, that sort of thing. So I'm taking Dion Lewis here. As for Joe Mixon and Derrick Henry, I'm taking Derrick Henry just because of the sheer size. I'm sure Joe Mixon. I don't really pay much attention to the combine, but I'm sure Joe Mixon was slightly faster than Derrick Henry. But Derrick Henry is not slow by no means, and Derrick Henry just has so much more size than what Joe Mixon had. His now Joe Mixon isn't that far behind him in weight, but Derrick Henry has such a much bigger frame than what Joe Mixon has. Now Joe Mixon is more well-rounded than Derrick Henry, but we're running duos here, so we got one guy for one thing, another guy for another thing. This is a team type of thing. This is not a workhorse type of back situation. We're comparing the team, so I would rather have Derrick Henry in my team when I'm running a two running back duo. So I'm giving the Titans the edge here in this one. The next team we'll compare them to is the Carolina Panthers, who have Christian McCaffrey and C.J. Anderson, who we will compare to Derrick Henry. Christian McCaffrey is 5'11" and listed at 205 pounds. He had 117 carries for 435 yards last season, which come out to 3.7 yards per carry and 2 TDs. He also had 80 catches for 651 yards and another 5 TDs. So for this one, just based strictly off of rookie season, I'm giving the edge to Dion Lewis because he was a much more productive runner than what Christian McCaffrey was. McCaffrey had many more catches than what Dion Lewis had, but Dion Lewis had a much better catch rate. If you actually want it, I think I've actually got it here, the catch rate. Dion Lewis caught the ball 91.4% of the time, while Christian McCaffrey only caught the ball 70.8% of the time. So I'm going Dion Lewis here because he was much more efficient and much more productive. As for C.J. Anderson, who is probably one of the most productive backs in this whole entire list here, he stands 5'8", 224 pounds. He carried the ball 245 times for 1,007 yards, which come up to 4.1 yards per carry, and he added 3 touchdowns with that. Catching the ball, he caught the ball 28 times for another 224 yards and 1 TD. While C.J. Anderson isn't the type of power back Derrick Henry is, he is very well-rounded, kind of like a Joe Mixon. He has been productive for a couple of years, so for that reason, I'm going to give C.J. Anderson the very slight edge here just because of what he's been able to accomplish in the past. He's went over 1,000 yards. He's proven he can catch the ball on a consistent basis, and he did that with a terrible offensive line there in Denver, which Derrick Henry cannot say because we've always had a good line while he's been here. But that was just an awful, awful offensive line that C.J. Anderson was able to produce with there in Carolina. I do expect C.J. Anderson to come out and it be about a 50-50 split there in Carolina like it will be here in Tennessee. But I'm going to give the edge to Tennessee because the gap between Dion Lewis and Christian McCaffrey is much bigger than the gap between Derrick Henry and C.J. Anderson. Drum roll, please. The next team that we're going to compare the Titans to is a division rival, the Houston Texans, who have Lamar Miller, who will be compared to Dion Lewis, and Devonta Foreman, who will be compared to Derrick Henry. And the Titans win because we are the Titans. They are the Texans. We hate the Texans. So the Titans win because we're just better than them at every phase of the game. So, but I guess I will go ahead and explain this one. Lamar Miller, who's compared to Dion Lewis, as I said, stands at 5'10", 220 pounds. He carried the ball 238 times for 888 yards, which come out to a 3.7 yards per carry and 3 TDs last season, while adding 36 catches for 327 yards and another 3 TDs. While Lamar Miller isn't the same type of runner, two very different styles. Lamar Miller is more well-rounded than what Dion Lewis is. Well, I would not even say that. Lamar Miller is built better than what Dion Lewis is for a more well-rounded role, but Dion Lewis, I feel, is too small to be running between the tackles, but he does it. He does it very efficiently. So Lamar Miller is bigger and built better to run between the tackles, but he doesn't do it as efficiently as Dion Lewis does. Yards per carry, Dion Lewis is averaging 5. Lamar Miller, 3.7. Dion Lewis had 6 rushing TDs last year, while Lamar Miller only had 3. Lamar Miller did have more catches, but catch rate was nowhere near close to what Dion Lewis's was. Dion Lewis had the same amount of TDs as Dion Lewis had the same amount of reception TDs as what Lamar Miller did on far fewer targets and catches. As for Devonta Foreman compared to Derrick Henry, this is another one who is very close to being built similar to Derrick Henry, who stands 6'1", 235 pounds. He carried the ball 78 times for 327 yards, which come out to a 4.2 yards per carry and 2 TDs. He added 6 catches for 83 yards. His season was cut short, so it's really hard to compare because we don't know how good he could have been without the injury. But just based off what I see, they have the same yards per carry mark. Uh, 2 TDs compared to 5 TDs, 11 catches. He may be a little better than Derrick Henry when it comes to catching, but they're not for this. That's not their role to catch. They're here to punish defenses, to pound the ball into the end zone. I will give Derrick Henry the very slight edge because he is bigger. I wish Derrick Henry would build his head full of steam faster, kind of like D'Onta Foreman does, but I don't think D'Onta Foreman has that top end speed like Derrick Henry does. So for that reason, I'm giving the nod to the Tennessee Titans because the gap between D'Onta Foreman and Derrick Henry is very small, but the gap between Dion Lewis and Lamar Miller is quite large, I believe. The next team we will compare the Tennessee Titans to is the Chicago Bears, who have Tarik Cohen, who of course will be compared to Dion Lewis, and Jordan Howard, who will be compared to Derrick Henry. Tarik Cohen is 5'6" and 181 pounds. He's actually smaller than what Dion Lewis is, and probably the closest one built to how Dion Lewis is built on this list. He carried the ball 87 times for 370 yards last season, which come out to 4.3 yards per carry and 2 touchdowns. He also caught the ball 53 times for 353 yards and another TD. Jordan Howard, who is compared to Derrick Henry, stands 6 foot tall, 224 pounds, who carried the ball 252 times last year for 1,313 yards. He averaged 5.2 yards per carry, the first running back on this list to have averaged more yards per carry than Dion Lewis has, and 6 touchdowns. He also added 29 catches for 298 yards and another score. As for Tarik Cohen and Dion Lewis, built very similar. The difference is how Dion Lewis is used and how Tarik Cohen is used. Tarik Cohen is strictly there for passing downs. He's strictly there to be a receiver or to really gash the defense on a outside run or a zone run. Whenever defenses get worn down from being pounded by Jordan Howard, it's how he's used as to where Dion Lewis is just used as basically a 3-down back if you want him to be, although he doesn't have to be, but he could be, where I don't think Tarik Cohen could. So therefore, I'm giving Dion Lewis the nod on that one. As for Jordan Howard and Derrick Henry, I really hate to do this, but I have to give Jordan Howard the nod here, and it's not even close, to be honest with you. I think Jordan Howard is playing at that level that Derrick Henry could play at, as I said earlier, if he was more consistent, if he was able to get a full head of steam quicker, wasn't getting these slow starts in the backfield. I think Jordan Howard is what Derrick Henry could be. He averaged a full yard more per carry than Derrick Henry, had more touchdowns than Derrick Henry, more catches, more yards. But the difference is Jordan Howard is a workhorse back for the most part, where Derrick Henry, was having to take second string to DeMarco Murray, or at least split time with DeMarco Murray last season. So Jordan Howard did have many more opportunities. He almost had about 75, pretty close to 75 more carries than what Derrick Henry had. But still, you look at that, the more carries you have, it's easier for your yards per carry to go down unless you're having a lot of big runs. So having more carries and still averaging more yards per carry is pretty impressive to me. And I hope Derrick Henry can get to that level of play. So for this one, I'm kind of going to give it a tie because there is a big gap between Dion Lewis and Tarik Cohen for me, but there's also a big gap between Jordan Howard and Derrick Henry for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this one a tie. You guys in the comment section below, let me know what you think about this one, and try to be fair as I am. Don't just say because I'm a Titans fan that the Titans running backs are better. Give me reasons. Give me legitimate reasons. Try not to show favoritism, as I am not. The next team we're going to compare them to is very hard to compare because both of these running backs are very well-rounded running backs. They're not really power backs. They're not really pass-catching backs. They're not really speed backs. They're both kind of do-it-all backs, and that's the Atlanta Falcons. So it was kind of hard to decide how I was going to do these comparisons. So first I compared Devonta Freeman to Dion Lewis and Tillman Coleman to Derrick Henry. Devonta Freeman and Dion Lewis are the same height at 5'8". Freeman outweighs Lewis by about 10 pounds because he's listed at 206 pounds. Freeman had 196 carries for 865 yards last season, which come out to 4.4 yards per carry and 7 touchdowns. He also caught 36 passes for 317 yards and another TD. Now, when it comes to pass catching, I will give Dion Lewis a slight edge in this one. He didn't catch more passes, but he caught them more frequently, which Dion Lewis' 91.4% catch rate was the highest in the league. Wasn't even close. As for yards, Devonta Freeman had about 100 more yards, so that one can kind of go either way. But Dion Lewis had more touchdowns. And then in the running game, Dion Lewis did average more yards per carry. He had a few less carries. He had 16 fewer carries than what Devonta Freeman had. Devonta Freeman had one more TD, so he got one extra TD. So this one is very close. Devonta Freeman is built more thick than what Dion Lewis is, so he's built more to be a bell cow back than what Dion Lewis would be. Tevin Coleman stands 6'1", 210 pounds, so quite a bit smaller than what Derrick Henry is. He had 156 carries for 628 yards last season, and which averaged 4 yards per carry and 5 touchdowns. So as for him and Derrick Henry had more yards, averaged more yards per run, and they tied on touchdowns. As for receptions, Tevin Coleman had 27 catches for 299 yards and 3 TDs, which that does outdo Derrick Henry. But like I said, Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman are both very well-rounded running backs that you could really, both of them could really be your all-around back if you wanted to go that direction. But I am going to give the slight edge to the Tennessee Titans because Derrick Henry beats out Tevin Coleman, which isn't even really close for me, and the gap between Dion Lewis and Devonta Freeman is very small, if there even is one. Now, moving on, the last team on this list, and I'm guessing you already know what it is, the New Orleans Saints, who have Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. Alvin Kamara, of course, will be compared to Dion Lewis, and Mark Ingram to Derrick Henry. Now, as for Alvin Kamara, he's listed at 5'10", 215 pounds, so a little bit bigger than Dion Lewis. He carried the ball 120 times for 728 yards, which averaged out to a ridiculous 6.1 yards per carry, who had 8 touchdowns. He also caught the ball 81 times for 826 yards and 5 touchdowns. So really the gap is pretty big between these two backs, between Alvin Kamara and Dion Lewis, because Alvin Kamara, that 6.1 yards per carry is ridiculous. 8 touchdowns, 13 altogether is ridiculous. He had an 81% catch rate, so that's not bad either. A little bit bigger than what Dion Lewis is. And given his age, he's just going into his second year in the NFL. Now, will he produce like that even with Mark Ingram going through that 4-game suspension? Who knows? That's going to be a hard rate to sustain, especially with teams starting to game plan for him and trying to figure out new ways to stop him. With Drew Brees having other weapons like Michael Thomas around, Mark Ingram coming back. I don't know if he can keep that up, but for now, I got to give Alvin Kamara the edge here, and really, honestly, it's not even close unless Dion Lewis can come out and, who had a career year last year, can come out and outdo himself again. Mark Ingram compared to Derrick Henry. Mark Ingram is 5'9", 215 pounds, built very solid, but quite a bit smaller than what Derrick Henry is. He carried the ball 230 times for 1,124 yards, which come out to a 4.9 yards per carry and 12 touchdowns. 58 catches for 416 yards, but he didn't have a TD catch last season, so he's very good on the yards per carry. Him averaging almost 5 is more impressive than Dion Lewis averaging 5 to me. The 12 TDs is what's really insane. That's kind of what I expect from Derrick Henry whenever he really hits his stride, if he could be more consistent and kind of see him being somewhere between Mark Ingram and Jordan Howard. I expect him to really bully his way into the goal line. I expect him to break off some long runs, kind of like Jordan Howard. 1,100 yards, going over 1,000. I expect to see that from him. But because of giving, again, age comes into a factor here, I'm giving the edge to Derrick Henry very slightly here, given the age and the size and the speed combo, not getting suspended, which a lot of memes come up. I'll try to throw one up on the screen if I can find it for you guys in this part of the video right now of Mark Ingram standing next to Derrick Henry. So I'm going to give Derrick Henry a very slight edge here, and I'm going to say the Saints have the best running back duo, probably followed by either the Titans or the Falcons or the Bears. So anyways, guys, that's what I've got. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like on the video if you like the content. Comment and let me know what you think, because I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear your thoughts and opinions as well. Check me out on Twitter. I'd like to interact with you guys there. The link is in the description box below. It's at Mr. Mulholland. Hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for watching. God bless, and tighten up.